Um, this is, well, I can read it. The adaptive reuse of historic churches and schools in Savannah. So if you're in the wrong room, now's a good time to go either way. A couple of housekeeping things before I introduce the speaker. You've probably heard him a dozen times already, but this is AIA certified lecture. Sign up outside on the a table if you need the credits. It's 1 credit. And also there's an evaluation sheet out there. It would be great if you just take a minute to fill out that evaluation sheet, so the feedback helps us and the speakers to see if we did right, where we were on cue, and maybe what can we do different or what can we do better. Neil Dawson, and if you take it's only an hour that we're here today, so I'm not going to take a whole lot of time reading his bio, and you can read that. If you read it, you will see that he's got extensive background in historic preservation and adaptive reuse of many buildings. And I sat in the lecture earlier this morning, and I started off by telling him in Boston, we consider the Historic Commission the hysterical commission. And we have obviously lots of old buildings, and we're always at odds with the Historic Commission because we don't like them telling us what we can do with our buildings or what we can spend our money on or what we can't spend our money, and we generally lose. I was happy to hear that they generally win, so we're going to bring him up to Boston to represent us in front of the Historical Commission. So, without any further ado, I'll turn the podium over to you.
Great.
Did they undo this yet?
Nope, I'm good to go. I'll just
You sure?
Yeah. Thanks, dude. I'm Neil Dawson. I'm an architect here in Savannah. I've lived here for 25 years, and I've spent that 25 years working within about a 5-mile radius of where we're sitting now. So this is kind of my turf. I've got a lot invested in it, and I love it. I love Savannah. I moved here from Charleston, and thought I would only be here a few months, and really fell in love. It's really been a great place to raise family, and a great place to be an architect. So today we're going to cover just a little bit about the history of Savannah and the importance that churches have played in it, and then kind of transition to the role of reusing some of those church resources and schools and kind of integrating some of the work that SCAD has done here in Savannah that we've been a part of. So I'll skip through the AIA required reading. And I have handouts. I don't know if there are any back there. They're hard to read, but if you want one, just give me your card and I can email you the PDF file, so it'll be a lot easier. Okay, so let's start with the background of Savannah. It was founded in 1733. We're the 13th colony, or the last star on the circle. So we were started by General Edward Oglethorpe in 1733. Came over really to establish a trading colony, and with the idea of religious liberties as part of the mission as well. The city was founded on a high bluff. You can see here. One little pointer works. Yeah, it's a 40-foot bluff. So right today, this would be River Street down here, and this would be Bay Street up here. So it kind of gives you an idea. And being a military general, Oglethorpe was the master of organization. So you can see that he organized the town in squares, and I'll see if I can get that. So he organized it in these wards, as we call them today, and you can see the original plan had 4 of them. He also deeded big sections of land outside of town that have now become some of our little satellite communities like Thunderbolt or Wormslow, that were plantations that were kind of outer defense posts for Savannah. So if the Spanish attacked from the south, he would have some advance warning. So this is a more detailed blow-up of the wards, and you'll see how this comes into play later, but these sections at the top and bottom are called tithing lots. Somebody asked me earlier what the tithing is. I don't know if that was like your 10th that you got, I'm not sure. But they're typically long lots. They're 90 feet deep. This direction is 90 feet. And they're usually split into increments of 30 feet or 60 feet or sometimes subdivided and they're 45 feet or 20 feet. But if you look at our houses and buildings, you see a pretty strong rhythm of 30-foot modules on all the tithing lots. On some of the commercial streets, you'll see these buildings face the north-south street, but more often than not, let's see if we can back that up. More often than not, they'll face the square. And so the tithing lots really have an important role. Primarily, that's where most of the houses are, some of the businesses. When you put the wards together, these end up being boulevards on the ends and more dedicated thoroughfares. So if you look at the traffic flow, even though it's a 300-year-old town, 350 years old, it's really easy to transit the city because your main thoroughfares are to the sides of your squares. And so when you get into this zone of a ward, the traffic pattern slows, and of course it's one way. We must have a tourist day today because I saw two guys going the wrong way on the squares. So if you go this way, and you can in and out, exit, you can do all of that at a really slow pace. And you find that these roads tend to be less traveled, and the lanes really are just for utilities. But if you get in a bind, there you go, you got it out. So it's a great layout in terms of the organization of these squares. And so as the town grew, this is 1796, you can see that module of the original ward was just expanded. Of course, the whole interaction with Bay Street and the river kind of stayed the same, but the width of it grows and the number of modules kept getting added. And here you can see some of these colonial roads that go out to some of the other historic towns that protected Savannah. So in 1818, you see the plan fairly well realized. I think there are 10 squares in this. We end up with 22 squares ultimately. We have 2 squares that have been lost thanks to urban renewal, poor leadership. But you can start to see in this plan in 1818 these 2 streets that bound the town. And this is East and West Broad Streets. West Broad has later been renamed MLK. And you start to see the influence of some railroad development on one side and a little bit of agricultural development on the east side. This map's upside down, of course. I don't know why. And so these broad streets were really ways that all of the river traffic at these wharves would be loaded in and out, and then up and down these primary streets of commerce, and then loaded onto trains or smaller ships or canals that would go upbound into the rest of Georgia. So it's a fairly efficient system, and then in 1891, it continued to expand to really almost the way it looks now. You can see a little more clearly here, West Broad Street and East Broad Street, how they define the city. And then some of the railroad infrastructure that starts to get added to it. Someone asked me earlier about River Street. I hadn't really planned to talk about it, but it is kind of an interesting history. Most of the buildings, well, we'll get to a slide. I'll hold off and we'll talk about that when I get to that other slide. But here's Savannah today, so it looks much the same. Instead of railroads, now we have the snaky interstates that connect us to the rest of the world. But very much the same town that it was long ago. And it still functions quite well in that same format. This is an old Sandmore map, so you can kind of see how buildings find their place in the tithing lots and then the trust lots. I don't think I mentioned it, but the trust lots are the 4 lots facing the square. And those were reserved really for important civic buildings. You can see on this map, that's a bank, that's a church, this is another bank up here. And sometimes in breaking the grid, you'll see like a customs house. But typically the 4 lots that face the square, east and west, are the trust lots. Those are the civic lots. Most of your churches you'll find on those lots. So these are the kind of buildings that typically occupy trust lots. You can see here in this case, this is Lutheran Church of the Ascension next to a courthouse. On the other side of that square is the federal courthouse. And then it takes 2 tithing lots because I guess the federal government is that important that they needed to break the city grid and have a double. In fact, they've done that a couple times, much to our chagrin. Other buildings you'll see on squares are banks. You know, it kind of looks like they got the same architect to do all the banks. I guess they want you to feel like your money's not going to go anywhere. So big two-story marble buildings, lots of neoclassical Greek influence on them. Museums you'll find facing squares. This is the old Tailthorpe Museum on the left and the new Tailthorpe Museum on the right. And then houses. And typically a house on a trust lot is a very important house. You know, if you were one of Oglethorpe's buddies, you probably got a trust lot. So those are reserved for really prominent residences. Most of these that you'll see are open for tour, or they're bed and breakfast or something like that. But really stately mansions that hold a unique place. The trust lots are fairly narrow. They're only 60 feet wide. And so one of the challenges is that as you look at some other houses, this house on the right, Green Meldrum, is where Sherman headquartered in Savannah when he marched to the sea. And then there are churches. And so churches, a 60-foot lot on a trust lot is a fairly decent size. However, there are some churches, two main ones that break that grid. And one is Independent Presbyterian Church, and the other is the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist that you'll go visit tomorrow, I believe. And so I'm just going to show you a few pictures of some of these historic churches, typically on squares. Independent Presbyterian is where Woodrow Wilson got married here, and it's noted for its coffered oval ceiling. It's really a beautiful facility. Lutheran Church of the Ascension, which looks much like it did 100 years ago, 150 years ago. St. John's, which has sort of a Carpenter Gothic look to it. It's associated with the Green Meldrum House. Again, on a trust lot. Oh, yeah, I had this wrong. It's not Christ Church Anglican, it's Christ Church Episcopal. They have a little split, you might know. Yeah, in fact, it went to the Georgia Supreme Court, so that was quite a bitter split. But you can see the historic picture of the building, even with the old horse-drawn carriages, looks really remarkably like it does today. So it's been incredibly well maintained. Savannah is the home of the Methodist faith. John Wesley first landed in Savannah from England and started his Methodism approach to religious rigor. And so there are a lot of Methodist churches here. He actually started a lot of his itinerant preaching circuit in Savannah. So there is a wealth of Methodist history here as well, including Wesley Monumental Church with its asymmetrical steeples. One of the other factors that's unique in Savannah, I think, because it was a port of entry, we have a wide diversity of both ethnic groups, faiths, and just people in general. So it's made it a real melting pot that's sort of an anomaly for a small southern town. So like the Greek Orthodox Church, I still have, all of my friends that are Greek. I know where they go to church. And it's ironic that it has maintained that kind of cultural richness through kind of a melting pot of centuries. Even the Unitarian Church, which was founded in 1850, moved a couple times, but even that faith has had a strong root here in Savannah for a number of years. Even the temple is one of the few in the form of a Gothic church. So to look at the exterior, you would think, oh, that's a nice church, but it's a Jewish synagogue. And most of these are open for tour if you get a chance to walk around. And then the Baptist, I grew up Baptist, so I can joke at them, but we've got First Baptist, First African Baptist, Second African Baptist, Bryan Baptist. I mean, if you don't like it, we'll start a new one for you soon. So just hang on if you don't like something about what we do. There are even churches that meet in theaters. So this is Lake Church. And that's actually one of the first buildings I renovated in Savannah, the old vaudeville theater, the Lucas. And so that brings us to, I think, the best church in Savannah. I don't think anybody would argue that, but it's the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral here in town of St. John the Baptist. It really is, I think, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary buildings in Savannah and probably throughout the South. Just the articulation and detail in both the exterior and interior is truly impressive and a monument to the Catholic faith, I believe. So if you have the chance to tour tomorrow morning, I would not miss that. It's an exceptional building. There have been many buildings built by the Catholic faith that have come to demise as well. This is an old Catholic library that was on Drayton Street that quite beautiful, but unfortunately it was cleared to put this building in. So that's kind of an unfortunate loss, although you'll be pleased to know that this building has now been designated as a contributing historic structure, so it can't be torn down. So it's kind of ironic, we tore down a really beautiful building to build an international style of dubious distinction, but now it's historic. And then St. Patrick's Catholic Church is over on Montgomery Street. Beautiful, beautiful architecture, and the Catholic schools were really smaller and interspersed among the downtown area. And so this was cleared in the 60s to make room for this nice building, which thankfully is not historic yet, so hopefully we can get it torn down before it gets deemed historic. Our Civic Center. Other parts of Catholic influence in Savannah, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, but the Franciscan Sisters had a strong presence in Savannah, educating African American families well before integration. In fact, right from the end of the Civil War. And so this influence is significant and yielded Clarence Thomas, who's one of our local heroes, that a local boy gets to the Supreme Court. You got to be proud. In fact, his family spoke Gullah as their primary language at home when he was growing up. So quite an accomplishment to go from a very poor grandchild of slaves speaking Gullah growing up in the Supreme Court, and really a testament to the Catholic. This building is no longer a school. It's been decommissioned, and the convent that's adjacent to it is a building that we renovated, and I'll get to that in a minute and kind of show you how these buildings have been adapted. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our decline. We don't like to talk about it because everything looks great now, but it wasn't always the hipster coffee bar or music scene that it is today. You can see our waterfront. Not a place you'd like to hang out, probably. It's there was a time, really in the 1920s, with both the Great Depression and the demise of cotton in the South. Really hit Savannah hard. There was some renovation in the 60s, the 50s post-war boom, but it wasn't anything like you'd see in some other towns. And so you had large sections of housing. There's just a really beautiful example of a house that's sitting derelict. And the work that did happen, you can see this photo of Broughton Street. In the 50s and 60s, a lot of our retail on Broughton Street was, turn of the century or 1880s, 1860s buildings. They got these facades because it was no longer in vogue to have the old historic windows like you see here. So they came back and they would coat these things with plaster or metal panels or just whatever they could find and cover up the old facades. And so Broughton Street, even when I got here in the early 90s, was not at all like it is today. In fact, you can still see a lot of the buildings that do have those kind of metal facade covers on them. And so I spent the first 10 years of my career, I was a hero. All we did was take down metal panels and reveal these beautiful cast iron lintels and windows that were still there. So it was kind of fun. But even in the tough times, you see here at Christ Church in kind of a state of disrepair, but certainly not in full decline. But one of the interesting things about Savannah, I think, downtown, is that the church has remained the center of family life. And so on Sunday mornings, it's kind of like game day in an SEC town. If you've ever been to a football game, the parking is everywhere. There's not a place you can't park. If you can get your car there, it's okay. So it's kind of like that on Sunday mornings here in Savannah. The parking is just everywhere. And